Please remember there are additional resources and things such as code samples at elithecomputerguy.com. So if you're watching one of these classes and you need to know what code looks like, or if you need links to the resources that we're using, please go to elithecomputerguy.com and take a look at our class posting there. Also, please remember that free to the end user classes are not actually free. It costs me a lot of money to be able to provide this type of content. So if you could click on the donate button and throw in a couple of dollars every month, this will help me be able to continue to provide you this type of material. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, and in today's class, we're going to go over if-else statements and conditions in Python. So when we think about if-else statements, this is one of the foundational components of any programming language. Basically, you have the value for a variable, and you are going to test to see if it's equal to something, not equal to something, lesser than something, greater than something, and whatever the case may be, you are then going to trigger an event to happen. So when you think about programming languages, most people think about things like if-else statements. So the great thing about Python is that if-else statements are relatively simple as long as you use the proper syntax. So this is like the fourth or fifth class we've done in the series at this point, and one of the things I've talked about before is that spacing matters in Python, right? Whenever you're doing if-else statements, when you're doing while loops, when you're creating functions, the delimiter in Python is actually spacing, and so this is going to be one of the first places where you're going to see this. Now, do remember, right, if you're used to coding in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, any of those programming languages, you literally could have one line of code that goes from here to Mars in the digital sense, and that code will be able to run fine because you're using different delimiters in there. You're using things such as tag delimiters, or you're using semicolons as delimiters. The important thing to understand in the Python world is that if you don't do the spacing correctly, that basically your delimiter doesn't work, and so then your code will fail. So when we go through the code today, we have a couple of different scripts up here. I'm going to show you how to write these scripts. Most likely, if your scripts fail when you go to run them, it's because you screwed up with the spacing. So just take a look at that. So anyways, we're going to get into this class of if-else statements. Relatively simple, relatively easy. If you follow along, I don't think you'll have any big problems. Now, I'm just going to throw this shout out into almost any coding class that I'm going to do from now going into the future about W3 Schools. They do not sponsor me. I do not have an affiliate link. They do not pay me in any way, shape, or form other than to give very good information in a relatively easy to understand fashion. So we're doing Python. They have lots and lots of information about Python. I'm actually going to show you a little bit about that today. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, MySQL, jQuery, Django, Node.js, and a whole bunch of different programming languages. This is an absolutely excellent resource. So today I'm going to be telling you about conditions. You're going to be learning about conditions, and tomorrow you're going to forget what the conditions were. And you're going to like, oh, it was greater than and equal to and something else. Well, the great thing that you can do is you can come to W3 Schools, you can go to Python, you can go to conditions, and you can see all the condition values, and then you can beat that into your head. So for any basic information, W3 Schools is absolutely excellent. So do make sure you have this in the bookmark, and whenever you have any problems in coding in Python or any other language, I would recommend that you pull up this site to take a look at what they've explained about it. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about today is conditions in Python. And yes, we are going to be using W3 Schools because, again, there is no reason to reinvent the wheel, especially when somebody else made a really, really, really pretty and efficient wheel. So anyways, conditions. So when we are going to be checking to see if a value is greater than another value or less than another value or equal to another value, we have to use the proper syntax, and it's relatively simple. These conditions as far as I can tell, are the same across every programming language that I've ever used. So if you've done any other programming languages, great, you already know conditions. So that just saved you about 5 seconds of learning. Basically, when we look at the conditions, so again, you're going to be doing an if-else statement type of deal. So if the value is equal to less than whatever else, then another value, do something. That's what we're talking about with conditions. So equals, if A equals B. So this is the one that will screw you up in the real world, even after you've been coding for a while and you get a little bit tired. A equals B means A will take the value of B. A equals B is not a conditional. A equals B means basically if A equals the value of A equals the value of B, then do something. So equals means both of them. Basically, you're asking, are those values equal? All right. Not equals. So A, with this, you do an exclamation point equals B. So A is not equal to B. That's pretty simple. Less than. A, the value of A is less than the value of B. That's pretty simple. Greater than. A, the value of A is greater than the value of B. That's pretty simple. Less than or equal to. A is less than or equal to B. I'm going to go to the whiteboard in a second just so you really understand this. This is one of the things that kind of screws up noob coders. Once you get it, it's pretty simple, but it can kind of muck with your brain. And then greater than or equal to. So A is greater than or equal to B. So this, again, is dirt simple. Equal means are the values equal? Exclamation point equal, are the values not equal? Less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. But let's go over the board for a second to kind of explain the whole less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. So let's take a moment just to talk about the whole greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, because this is something that kind of mucks up, in people's brains when they're first learning how to do programming, right? So let's say we have a variable A greater than, let's say 10, and we have a variable A and we say less than 20, right? So if you're reading this, right? So basically if you're doing an if statement here, if A is greater than 10, then do something. The important thing to understand with this, right, that what we're asking here is basically if A is 11 or more, right? Because if A equals 10, 10 is not greater than 10. Therefore, you will go to the else statement, right? If you want to check to see whether A is greater than or equal to 10, so basically 10 or above, you would do greater than or equal to. If we say if A is less than 20, that means we're trying to see if A is 19, 18, 17, and so forth, right? If A is 20, in this particular situation, it would fail out because 20 is not less than 20. 20 is equal to 20. So if we want to check to see if somebody's age is 20 or below, we would say A is less than or equal to 20. So you might think about this like with drinking age. So let's say you're dealing with a bar, people coming into a bar, and you're trying to check their age. What you would want is age, right? If their age is greater or equal to 21 here in the United States. Again, if you screw up in programming, which is very easy to do, it's very easy just to, not put in a character. If you simply say if age is greater than 21, basically all the 21-year-olds will not be able to get in. It will fail it out because 21 is not greater than 21. 21 is equal to 21. And so you would have to do either age is greater than or equal to 21 in order to get 21-year-olds in, or you would have to say if age is greater than 20. right? So if age is greater than 20, the first year above 20 is 21, then people will be allowed into your bar. To be clear, this is, pretty simple. Again, dirt simple. As soon as I've said it, you probably understand what's going on, and you're probably going to laugh. You're like, wow, why is Eli spending a couple of minutes talking about this? Yeah, just wait. Just wait. You're going to be doing some coding soon, and then your code is just not going to work how you think it's supposed to work because you have used greater than versus rather than greater than or equal to. But this is just something just to keep in mind with the conditionals. And again, this is why you play. This is why you're constantly coding, just to honestly see how you mess things up in your own script. So here is our first script in this whole series of Python at this point. This is the first time I think you're going to be doing something dynamically on your own. You're going to be giving the value of a variable, and then something will happen based off of that value. Woo! So anyways, up here, we are going to be creating our variable. I have called this var underscore num because it's a variable and it's a number variable. You use underscore for variables. You can't use hyphens. No hyphens in variable names. It'll fail out. You'll get an error. And per PEP 8 styling standards, you don't use camel humps when you create variables. If you know what a camel hump is, don't use it. And if you don't know what a camel hump is, don't worry about it. Just don't use them. This is the proper styling for Python. Anyways, var num equals 500. So again, remember from our variable class, whenever we create a variable and assign a value to the variable, it is auto-assigned a data type. So Python is a typed programming language. Ints, floats, strings, sets, tuples, a whole bunch of other data types we're not going to worry about right now. But basically, again, it's not like JavaScript. JavaScript is a non-typed language. Python is a typed language, but it auto-types your data type based off of the value you put in. So when we set the value of var num to 500, since this is a whole number with no decimal places, this is now an int. So a float has decimal places, an int does not. So we create this variable up here. Then we come down here, and this is where we write our simple code. If var num is greater than 100, so this means 101, doesn't mean 100. If this says 100, you'll get the else statement. So if it's 101, even 100.1, right? As long as it's higher than 100, you're going to do something. When you do this statement, how you do statements, how you do loops, how you do functions in the Python world is all basically going to look the same. You're going to declare, so if here, then you're going to have whatever you're testing for, and then you end with a colon. So again, some programming languages use parentheses or whatever for if statements. We do not. We just simply finish with a colon. Then you come down to the next line. When you come down the next line, again, in Python, indenting is very important. This is how we deal with delimiters in Python. Now you'll notice here that I tab. Now, I will tell you this, per the PEP 8 standards, you're supposed to space, but I tab, because that's how I roll. I don't know, it's just easier for me when I tab, it's easier for my eyes to see it. I'm the only one generally seeing my code, well, other than you people. So I do the tab. I say Ethernet instead of Ethernet. One of the things you have to remember whenever you're learning from somebody is they all have their own quirks. We all have our own quirks. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not that we're right or even that we're wrong. It's just we do things the way that we do them. So how you do it, you've got to figure that one out. But I tab just because it's easier here. So anyways, you make the if statement. If var num is greater than 100, colon, indent, space or tab, and then we do print. Whenever we do the print statement, we have to put whatever we're printing within parentheses. If we are printing simple text, we then have to print that. We have to put that within either double or single quotation marks. So we're going to print. That's a big number. So if var num is over than 100, that's a big number. Now you'll notice again, since you're new here, this does not have the proper punctuation in it. because I don't want to get into escapes and other crap with this particular class. Because remember, if I do a single quotation mark here and then I do a single quotation mark here, the rest of it would exit out and this script would fail. So I could either put all this within double quotation marks and then have a single quotation mark at the that's, or I could have it within a single quotation marks and then have the escape for the single quotation mark at the S. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I could do, but then that gets much more complicated, and I'm trying to keep this simple for you folks. So again, I will remove the punctuation just so the code is a little easier for you to follow. Again, do remember though, if you put a single quotation mark here, you're just used to it. Remember, it opens here, it'll then close there, and then everything else will fail out because it doesn't understand what to do with it. Anyways, so if var num is greater than 100, print, that's a big number. Else, so if it's anything else, so basically if it's 100, 100 or less, print, that's a small number. All right, that's pretty simple. So up here, we know what the value for var num is, and then we are going to hit the run button, and when we hit the run button, so that little run Python script over on the side, and that's going to say that's a big number. So 500 is greater than 100, so it prints out that's a big number. If I go up here and I do that, so it is now 50, and I run it again, 50 is not greater than 100, so else that's a small number, and then we get printed out on the screen, that's a small number. You've now learned the core of programming. You just flesh this out by many lines of code. And then you have a real program. But this is all there is, again, to the if-else statements. So if this condition is true, do this. If that's not true, do this. So now let's get to the if, else if, else statements in the Python world. So basically this is, when you have one statement and you want to see if any number of conditions may be true. Now it is important to understand when you do this, as soon as a condition is true, you will break out of the if, else statement and go on to the next thing. So if you're trying to see if a number of conditions are true, you have to work with your script to make sure that that actually happens, but that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Basically, all we're doing, though, with the if, else statements is if this is true, do this. If that's not true, but this is true, do this. And if neither of those is true, do something else. Now, when you're doing else ifs, you can do a lot of else ifs. It's not simply if, else, if, else. You could do if, else, 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 if, right? You could have 20 else ifs if you really wanted to. Do realize, again, there's a difference between what you technically can do and what is ugly as hell. You get up to 20 else ifs, it might end up being ugly as hell. There might be a better way of doing it. But with the else ifs, it's not a single else if. You can have 20 or 30 else ifs if you really want it to happen. One of the things just to keep in mind, if you've been dealing with other programming languages though, is when you do Python and you do else if, you do elif. ELIF is the word for else if in the Python world. If you use other programming languages, it might be else space if, else if together, that type of thing. Again, this is just for any of the noobs out there. This is one of the things that screws you up when you're dealing with different programming languages, is it's not that you don't know what you want to do, and it's not that you theoretically don't know how to do it, but many times, like, you literally get screwed up. Like, no, but seriously, how do you simply say else if in this language, right? Python, you say elif. So anyways, let's take a look at this. Looks a lot like what we did in the last lab with a little bit additional. So var num equals 5. So the value of var num is now 5. Since this is a whole number, it means the data type of var num is 5. Remember, we talked about that before. Then what we're going to do here is we're going to have an and. We're going to have an and. So when you do these statements, you can have and or ors, if you want to do it. So what we're going to say is if var num is greater than 50, so if this value is greater than 50, and var num is less than or equal to 100, do this. Now do look at this with the condition. Var num is greater than 50. So this means if var num is 51 or above, var num is less than or equal to 100 if var num is 100 or below. So what this means is if var num is between 51 and 100, basically it's in the middle, it's average, print not big or small, because it's just kind of in the middle, right? That's how ands work. And again, with the greater than or equal to, or just the less than or greater than, that's how that kind of works in order to give you something like a range there. Elif, so if it's, not this, var num is greater than 100. So again, and this is where you have to be careful with these conditionals. So less than or equal to 100. So if it's 100, this will fire off. If var num is greater than 100, so you'll notice I don't use greater than or equal to, greater. So that means 100 or 1 or above, right? Print, that's a big number. So again, notice this here. Again, that's one of the things that might dork you up, is if I do less than or equal to 100 here, and I do greater than or equal to 100 here, both of these conditions will end up being true, and you might get some weird stuff going on with your code, depending on how you want everything to fire off. Then finally, we do the else. Print, that's a small number, right? So if I go up here, and for var num, I say 70, I hit go, and so basically 70, we get not big or small. So 70 is greater than 50, and it is less than or equal to 100, so we get not big or small. If I simply do 7, run the exact same code, that's a small number because it's not between 51 and 100. It's not over 100. It's something else, so that's why you get the small number. And if I do 700, I run it, we get that's a big number, right? Because it's bigger than 100. So here, it's bigger than 100, and so that's where we get that's a big number. So that's the basic idea of what we're talking about with if, else statements. Remember, in the Python world, it is elif. Remember, when you're doing these conditions, be careful of the greater than or equal to, or just greater than, right? That will really screw with you. And if you're trying to test for multiple conditions, you can use and in order to test for those multiple conditions. So now that you understand if-else statements and else-if, else statements, I want to add a little bit more dynamism to this particular script so that you can see kind of how this would fire off if you had live data coming into your script. One of the ways I like to test scripts, again, with quote-unquote live data, is simply to add random numbers, right? Throw a random number at your if-else statement and see what the hell happens. That keeps you from having a bias of not putting in a number that you know might screw up your script, so that you can just, circle through and continuously do a script, get random numbers, throw them in there, and see what the hell happens. So with this, we're going to be dealing with modules today. Now, we haven't gone over modules yet in this Python series. We will do that relatively soon, but this is dirt simple. All you got to do is follow along, and I swear you'll understand modules and functions in modules later. So again, one of the things I've talked about in the past with Python, one of the good things, or the horrible things, depending upon your viewpoint, is basically any function that you're going to need in your Python script, you are going to have to import the module that allows you to access that function, right? So if you're dealing with the PHP world, if you want a random number, if you want the time, if you want to even send an SMTP email, that's all built into the basic PHP script, and you just call the function and you don't really think twice about it. That's not how it works in Python. If you want a random number, by God, you're gonna import a module to get your random number. So anyways, what we're going to be doing up here is the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import the random module. So random is a built-in module to Python, so you don't have to add this or do anything. If Python works, You have the random module. We're simply importing it into this particular script. Then what we're going to do is we're going to call the randint function in the random module, right? So var num, right, that var num variable that we created for, equals the random module, the function inside the random module, 0, 150. So the lowest number will be 0, the highest number will be 150. So basically what this does is it finds a random number between 0 and 150, and it assigns that value to var num. Then what we're going to do here is we're simply going to print out the value of var num. So this is going to be print out on the screen. Again, this is a troubleshooting procedure, so we know what the hell's going on, especially when we're new, right? Why did that if else statement do what it did when I don't think it's supposed to do that? Again, make sure you understand the numbers, the data that you're dealing with, especially at this level. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to say if var num is greater than 50 and var num is less than or equal to 100, so if var num is between 51 and 100, print not big or small. If var num is greater than 100, print that's a big number. Else, print that's a small number. So that's what we did before. Again, same script, between 51 to 100, not big or small, greater than 100, that's a big number, else, that's a small number. Then we're going to do another if-else statement down here, and I just wanted to show you what OR looks like, right? In our last script, we did an AND, so now we're going to do an OR. If var num is less than 50, or var num is greater than 100, print the number is on the edge. So think about this if you're doing things like statistically, and you're trying to figure out what who the outliers are. So outliers in statistics are basically any numbers that are outside the standard deviation. As I explain it, I realize I don't want to go any further. Anyways, when you're dealing with statistics, basically the outliers are the numbers that are outside where the average is. So let's just kind of think of it this way, right? So we're going to say, if you're less than 50 or you're greater than 100, you're kind of like an outlier. Print the number is on the edge, right? So that's OR. Less than 50. So if you're 49 or you're 101, the number is on the edge. Else, print the numbers in the middle. So numVar is going to be a random int between 0 to 150. Depending on what that is, it's either going to be not big or small, big or small, and then it's going to print out whether it's on the edge or whether it's in the middle. All pretty stupid, but you got to start somewhere. So I run this, and basically we see here the number. Print the number is 75. 75 is between 51 and 100, so it's not big or small. The number is in the middle. If I run it again, since it's dynamic, and we get 120, that's a big number. That number is on the edge. And basically, I can just sit here. And this is what's nice about using something like a random int or a random number is I can just keep rerunning the script and verifying nothing stupid happens. And that's going to be one of the big problems. Right? When you actually write a really complicated script, again, when you've got a lot of conditions in there, again, you forget an equal sign or you forget one thing, and it's technically correct. Like it's not going to fail. It's not going to fail because it's technically correct. But the answer that you get is absolutely wrong. So that's one of the nice things with using something like a random int or some kind of random value to toss in there is you can just continuously keep rerunning the script to see if you run into any issues. So now we're here at the final lab for today. And so this is for strings, for text, right? So up until this point, we've been dealing with numbers. What I showed you with ints will work the exact same way with floats. But when we get to text, it is slightly different. With text, instead of those conditionals, less than, equal to, or whatever else, we either do in or not in. So with this, we're going to have a var string, and it's going to equal Bob. So with this, basically the way that we're thinking about it is that this is the name of the person a message is supposed to be for, right? So the string variable is Bob, and then we're going to have a message, right? So message equals hello Bob, how are you doing? And so we want to fire off these two if-else statements to see if the person's name is in the message. If it is, then do something. If it's not, then do something else. So here, so if var string, so if Bob in message, so hello Bob, print the message. So if Bob is in the message, print out the entire message. So think about this again, think about like an email or a messaging system, that type of deal. Else, print the message is not for you. It's not for you, right? Pretty simple. If var string not in message, right? So if Bob is not in message, print try again later. So if somebody's waiting for a message, let's say it's a queue, it's like, oh, none of the messages are for you, try again later. Else, so the message was for the person, I hope you like your message, right? So again, this is one of those things. So if somebody got a message, it's like, I hope you liked it. If you have any issues, let us know. If they didn't get a message, oh, I'm sorry about that. Why don't you check later? You might get a message later, right? Kind of like a simple idea of what's going on, like with a messaging system. So with this then, all I do is run it. So var string Bob. And so since Bob is in the message, it will print out the message. And again, since it's in the message, it'll say, I hope you liked your message. So hello, Bob, how are you doing? I hope you liked your message, right? Message, I hope you like your message. Then if we come up here and let's say the user is Sue. So I've logged in. So again, I log into the system and my name is Sue, let's just say. It grabs that name. And so it's checking to see if you have any messages. So with this, let me clear that out. So now it's going to run. So Sue, so if var string in message, if Sue is in message, which she's not, print the message is not for you, right? If we come down here, if Sue is not in message, right, which is true, print try again later. And so the message is not for you, try again later. Woo. So that's kind of like the basics of seeing whether text is or is not within a string. And again, when you're doing this type of thing and you're trying to figure out, when do you use in, when do you use not in? Again, that's a syntax thing. That's a decision thing. Like when you're writing it, how do you think the code operates most efficiently? And then write the code that way, and then expect somebody to tell you that you did it wrong. So there you go. Now you understand a little bit about if-else statements in Python. If-else statements, if-else-if, or elif-else statements, and whether text is in or not in a string. You've seen how to test for that, and then fire off an event if it does happen. Again, remember, you have your statement. At the end of the statement is a colon. The next line, again, either a space or a tab. I use tabs, that's just me. And if you do it that way, your code should work. If you run the code and it fails out, it'll most likely tell you you had some kind of spacing issue, and go back and just futz around with that spacing issue, and life should be pretty easy. Again, when you're doing the conditions, just remember that whole greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Again, so much of what we get paid for and what we do is not nearly as complicated as people think. It's just keeping this crap in our mind and making sure our scripts function how they're supposed to. Because again, if you have two truths in a statement, things may not fire off the way that you're expecting. So just kind of be careful about that. And then again, when you're doing this, Do you want to test if something is true? Do you want to test if something is false? How do those statements actually look? Right? That's going to be a styling decision on your part. And what's interesting and what you'll start seeing in Python is you'll run into that issue of code will function perfectly, but depending on how different people write it, it might be ugly as hell. And one of the things that you really have to think about is that when you hand this code off to somebody else, hopefully you're going to get promoted, right? The plan is for you to get promoted, which means you're going to hand this off to somebody. So when you hand the code off to somebody, does it make logical sense? Just because it's logical to you doesn't mean anybody else understands what the hell you're trying to accomplish. So this is where you start to see where that kind of styling really starts to matter as you are writing your code. But that's really about it. Again, pretty simple. Pretty simple. Again, if you have questions, make sure to go to W3 Schools. They do an absolutely wonderful job of answering most of the questions that you're going to have. As always, I enjoy teaching this class and I look forward to seeing the next one.